Ask for help when you need it and give help when you can. I think that is how we serve God and each other and ourselves in times as dark as these. Mother Superior, The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. Hello, everyone. I'm Kennedy Weibel,
And I'm Rebecca Weibel.
and this is Reading Pop Classics, the podcast where we discuss modern literary classics, books that had substantial impact on the zeitgeist and continue to endure. Our last episode was on My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh. I want to thank everyone who wrote to us to share their thoughts on that book, particularly all of your insights on the ending, what you thought of our take on it, and what you all thought of it. And thanks again, both just for listening and for engaging with us. And everyone, you are welcome to please keep it coming. You can write to us at readingpopclassics@gmail.com, and you can follow us on Instagram and Lit Salon, also at Reading Pop Classics. I would like to add that my children's book, Bed Critters, is available on Amazon or wherever you buy books. It is a rhyming book for children, starting about ages 2 or 3. Bed critters, critters as in small furry things. If you have a small child and you still need to get a gift for the holidays, consider buying Bed Critters by Kennedy Weibel, and again, available on Amazon or wherever you buy your books. Okay, today we are discussing Kristen Hanna's The Nightingale. The book tells the story of two sisters in France during World War II, their struggle to survive and resist the German occupation there. This book spent 45 weeks on the NPR hardcover fiction bestseller list. And to give some context to that, you probably know there's only 52 weeks in the whole year. It spent 20 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. The last metrics I found were as of 2021. It had been published in 45 languages and sold more than 4.5 million copies worldwide, which, to get a little bit scientific and use some very technical terms, that is an absolute buttload of books. So, Rebecca, starting off, did you like this? This is far more story driven than some of the books we've done in the past.
Yes, so I do like this book. This was a second read for me. And speaking of the popularity of this book, the first time I read this book was shortly after it had come out. And I did live in New York City at the time. And when I was reading it in public, like on the subway or in a coffee shop or whatever, I remember the experience more than once, people coming up to talk to me about the book. Do you love this book? I thought it was amazing. What part are you at? So it did have a lot of conversation, at the time. So that was just something that I remember, initially when I was reading this book, and it did not disappoint on the second read for me, even though I kind of already knew some of the story.
I'm glad we did this one. I'll say it's not a book that I would pick up and read on my own. I don't read a ton of just or very heavily story driven books. But I'm aware of this one. I've seen it on front tables at Barnes and Noble, in other bookstores that I go to. I'm aware of its like massive popularity in the culture. I used to see it just out on the bus, on the subway. Um, I remember when it came out, like it was just for like a year, it was what people were reading and talking about. And I still see it. When I tried to check it out of the library for this podcast, I'm not exaggerating. It was, I believe, an 8-month wait list for me to get it. And that's not just like that's for them shipping it from any library around me to my library for me to pick it up. Uh, this book is still going.
Well, I was going to say I do agree with you. This book is more story driven. The story is really what is mesmerizing, I think, about this book. I think the story itself is what people are responding to. But this book maybe has more like mass appeal than something that we might consider literary fiction. And I remember in a previous conversation um, that we were not recording, you kind of had some thoughts on the difference between like genre fiction and literary fiction. So if you wanted to talk about that, we can kind of talk about like maybe where this book fits in.
Yeah, I literary fiction, as far as it's defined, and I'm pulling this from just classes and reading and stuff. Literary fiction, is generally defined by being a little bit more character driven. And genre fiction tends to be more plot driven. Uh, really excellent examples of genre fiction combine both of those things, like a very heavily plotted book or a very heavily plotted story-driven book that has character depth. I think kind of makes up the standouts in genre fiction. And if you look at some of the ones we've done in the past, just recently, like Fight Club and My Year of Rest and Relaxation, the plots are secondary. Like we are spending time with the characters in those books more than we're like interested in exactly what happens. Not that we're not interested in it, but um, getting um, the thoughts and viewpoints of our narrator, our unnamed narrator, actually in both of the examples I gave, but getting the thoughts and viewpoints of those characters is heavier or is a more important aspect of those novels than what happens precisely.
Yeah, I
Um,
would say that something that's literary fiction is maybe a little bit more cerebral, and then genre fiction, I think literary fiction, I think sometimes is more cerebral. I think sometimes people are reading for like maybe growth and educate growth of mind and education, maybe as well as entertainment. And I think sometimes in genre fiction, you might get people that kind of read both, but like somebody who doesn't consider themselves like as much of a reader, I think a lot of times can pick up genre fiction and be really into it and really excited about it. And I don't know that that's always the case with literary fiction, that somebody who maybe doesn't consider themselves as much of a reader, they might pick up something that's literary fiction and not enjoy it, not be entertained by it in the same capacity.
no, people in my book club and people that I'm friends with, I talk to them about that where I don't know, I'll mention a book that I really enjoy and they're like, I tried to read that. Nothing happened. What was supposed to be going on? Because they're looking for a plot just like moving forward in time more so than they're looking for ruminations on the condition of life or whatever's going on in something that I mentioned. This one is from the opening. I think you mentioned off mic when we were prepping for the episode. It reads like a movie. Like it's like you're reading a film, this book.
Yes, I feel like you can really easily imagine this being made into, I mean, I guess these days we have the option for both a film or like, maybe some sort of limited series, on a streaming app. But yeah, like I feel like the pauses and action, like even like where the chapters break are very like I can see like the scene ending there. Um, I feel like there's these like kind of like symbolism or these nods that, this kind of like easy foreshadowing.
Yeah.
If you were reading this book for English class in high school, you could write a paper. I'll give a couple examples. In the beginning, Isabel is reading about Edith Cavale in World War One, who was a woman that I want to say she was an ambulance driver. She had some sort of kind of great contribution in World War One, and I feel like that's a little foreshadowing for like what's to come in Isabel's story. Um,
And I'll also add that when we're with Isabel back in Paris, and we'll talk about the plot in a minute, but like when we're with Isabel back in Paris and she's making these comments of like, where does my father go? He goes off wherever he goes and sits in the back room of his old bookshop. And her father's like, never come into the back room of the bookshop. It's my private area and you can never be in there. And we're like, oh, okay, that's 1,000% about to be a factor in one chapter.
Yes, absolutely. Or it comes up that their last name, Rosignol, means the nightingale. And I think when you have those little I think those little tidbits and books, I think that sometimes makes the reader feel clever. So again, I think if you have somebody who does maybe read a little bit more for entertainment, and they have those little nuggets, those little foreshadows, I think that makes them feel clever, and I think that makes them feel maybe like more connected to the book and connected to the story. And so I think some of those small things are some of the reasons for some of the popularity of this book, in addition to, again, the fact that it is a really great story.
This style of book that also like focuses so heavily on story and momentum also allows for like readers to just become engrossed with a book this long. And like I ripped through this. Like it didn't feel like a 500 and something page book, which is what it is. Uh, like I churned this up in I don't know 5 days, and that's like me reading it with a full-time job, a kid, and I'm also reading other things at the same time. I plowed through this book. It's tight, it's fast, it keeps it moving. The plot just hurtles along, and while that speed, I think, costs the narrative some things in terms of consistency and depth and like character development of like secondary characters and stuff, it never feels tedious.
No,
Like
it
you,
definitely never feels tedious, but I do agree with you the pacing of it, the fact that it is kind of that you can sort of read it quickly. Um, you're right that we do lose a little bit of character depth. There are certainly some things that I think we are told instead of seen. And I think the father character is a big part of that. We're told, he comes back from World War I really broken. We're told that he's not a good father more than we're seeing that. We're
yeah.
told a lot about that relationship more than it's something that we see throughout the book. And I do think there are a few cases of that in here.
And the book starts, we start with a framing device actually, like in present day, like looking back. But when we get into the actual story, when we go back in time, we start with an old woman looking through a trunk in her attic, giving us little glimpses into a past in World War II that like she's not talking about much anymore in her regular life. She's not telling her son about it. And then when we get back into France of 1939, we we open those scenes. It opens like a Disney movie. It opens like Beauty and the Beast to some extent. Like it's our first sister, Vianne, her husband, Antoine, their daughter, Sophie, having a picnic in the countryside in France. And like in case we don't know it's France, the picnic includes baguettes and brie, and they open a bottle of wine. They drove there in a Renault. I presume they're all wearing berets, smoking gauloises, and just it's all of the American ideas of France, like the easiest like visual cues you could have that something is set in France.
Yes, so I think so something that I think makes this an interesting book or unique is not maybe the word that I would use, but because World War II historical fiction is pretty popular. People really like that, and I mean we've discussed a little bit
World
that
War
that's
II is an enormous. It's this incident that I think is sort of the terrible clashing and calamity that like sort of gave birth to the modern world. And just you and I were raised in an environment where media is constantly going back to this well. Everything from Indiana Jones to Mad Men, if you watched that television show, is set like right after World War II, and like we're looking at you know the birth of sort of the advertising industry in a post World War II America with all these guys, Don Draper and Roger Sterling, all these guys who came back from the war.
absolutely. And I mean it's something it's not so much in the distant past for one. I mean, I suppose for people that are being born now or that are younger people now, it is a little bit, but like, yeah, to your point, like for our generation, your grandparents might have been in World War II or might have been affected by it, right? It happened in their lifetime. Um, the not to not to be too on the nose here, but like the whole world was involved in it, basically, right?
Yeah,
So I mean, lots of countries can trace their history and some of, to your point, the building of the modern world from World War II. Um, and I think this was a point that you had brought up again, sort of off mic, that World War II gives us sort of like the greatest villain ever known for media
we
in the
never got
Nazis.
over it. Yeah, we never got over it. It is my contention that every villain is sort of like a downstream version of the Nazis, like just the evilest villain of all time.
Well, and they are the bad guy in a lot of media.
Oh,
So like Captain America, I think spawns
they
out of
all they
World
also
War II
were
fighting the
they
Nazis.
yeah, they also were the bad guys. Like I finished this book, I was ready to invade Germany. They're like they're terrible. It's an earned position.
They're an
Uh,
incredibly modern example of evil.
Yes, and just like the absolute like horror that you like that can be uncovered even at the end of something as evil and terrible as a multi-nation like worldwide war, including both the Pacific theater and Western Europe and Russia and like all of these major players. And then at the end of it, you find an even greater layer of evil like underneath all of that. Like it got into our hearts, minds, and imaginations, and we've never ever moved away from it. And I hope happily like we don't encounter something that comes along and replaces it. Uh, when we start this book, when we start the story of the Nightingale, we start with Vianne, who kind of gives us our backstory, right? Like her and Isabel, her younger sister, their mother died, and they were sent to live at Les Jardins, which was the family's summer home, a home that had been in the family for, I think they say 300 years or something like that. In the book, their father just dumped them off, never recovered from World War One, was in apparently no way, shape, or form qualified or prepared to deal with two young girls after his wife died. And so they were raised out there. And something that I do think works for the novel very well is that when we hear of the conflict sort of that exists, the estrangement perhaps between the two sisters, Isabel's off at a boarding school, one of like a dozen that she's been kicked out of over and over again since she was a kid. Um, Vienne is married to Antoine and has a little girl, Sophie. But when we hear about the estrangement between them, because after they were dropped off here, sort of abandoned by their father, their mothers died, Vienne did not take very good care of her little sister, Isabel. And we know that from Vienne. Vienne cops to it right away, which think is, I think it's a good move to have it not be a he said, she said, or I guess a she said, she said, like two sides. What, Isabel views it one way, Vienne views it another way. Vienne knows right away that like Isabel's kind of got her dead to rights on like not being a great big sister. And like it comes from her. So I think that strengthens the idea of the estrangement between them that we're going to like be circling through the rest of the novel is to have one of the characters kind of know they did it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it sets up because there's other conflict in the novel. And so that doesn't need to be a conflict of like, oh, you didn't take good care of me. I tried. Like, no, I know that I didn't take good care of you. There's some guilt about it. So it sets up for there to be redemption and a change in the relationship. But like this is World War II. We have conflict coming down the road, so we don't necessarily need it to be um, between these sisters, or we know that that's going to be sort of like a part of the novel and like a part of their relationship, and that it will affect things down the road. But yes, that in itself doesn't need to be something that there's back and forth about.
No, and because I think the thing between the two sisters is the strongest and most well portrayed like relationship within the novel, even though they don't spend a lot of the book together. Um, and I think that starting it off that way kind of gives it a depth and a realism for the reader that carries it through where we can keep thinking about it and knowing about it throughout the book, even though by virtue of like what the plot needs to do, these two characters don't share a ton of page time. Although they do start off together. So Isabel gets kicked out of another boarding school. She makes her way back to Paris, where her father, knowing that the Germans are coming, immediately sends her off to Les Jardins to be with her sister, Vianne, whose husband has just been called up to the front. The what's the name of it? It just flew out of my head. The Mangione line,
The the Maginot Line.
the Maginot line. Yes, he's sent up there. Isabel begins the long slog with all of the other people fleeing Paris out to Les Jardins, the village where her sister still lives. And then her and everybody else are bombed by Germans on the walk out there, which is where, in the midst of all this, Isabel meets Gaeton. I'm going to go ahead and just lay this out, by the way. I am going to be mangling French throughout this episode. I'm going to be absolutely butchering it.
Me
Uh,
too. I took Spanish all through school. I have never taken French. I point at things on the menu when they are in French, and I don't try. And so, yeah, we are going to be together, people who do not speak French, and we'll be absolutely mangling.
Oh, so I'm gonna slaughter people's names
Mangling
and
French.
stuff. Yeah. Um, I think I already got some under my belt. I don't think I said Gauloises, that cigarette brand, correctly.
I
Uh,
was going to pronounce it Galoy,
that's how I want to say it, but
but
I know that
I could be wrong. I will not stand. I will never stand behind French pronunciation if I'm trying to figure it out on my own.
it's closer to Gaulois, even though I'm positive that's not correct. But that's where she meets Gaetan, a young, devastatingly handsome communist. Is that ever like
Uh,
actually like verified? He is a communist, right? That's what we're supposed to.
that's well, I
He'd
mean,
been in jail
that's how
for,
he is described.
yeah.
That's how he's described in the book. Yeah, as a communist.
So she meets Gaetan and they spend, I don't know, a week or whatever it is, making their way out to Le Jardin, where he promptly abandons her because she tells him that she loves him and he's going off to, I don't know, resist the Germans. And
Right, to
he,
be part of the Free France resistance.
yes, and he leaves her on the back gazebo at Le Jardin where her sister finds her, um, and is like promptly annoyed with her. And so then the two of them and Sophie are in the house in Le Jardin, and then Captain Beck, a German, comes to billet with them, or be billeted, however you say it, um, with them because the Vichy government of France surrenders really quickly. Germany makes it a couple of feet beyond that Maginot line, and the Vichy government's just sort of like, why don't we welcome our German brothers and sisters to to France?
Well, and so this is so something that so I want to pause here to talk a little bit about that. So something that I think is interesting in this book. So I mean this book is written by an American, and to your point, when the way this book kind of opens and she makes it as French as possible is very much like an American writing about
I've
France, right?
if Belle from Beauty and the Beast had like danced through the scene, it couldn't have been more French.
Exactly. And so, so there's that. But also for this to be a book that is written by an American, a lot of times I feel like World War II historical fiction, and we talked about this a little bit with Slaughterhouse-Five, is that like the US views itself as like the heroes of World War II, that like we came in and saved the day. Um,
American media representations of World War II are like 99.999% from the American point of view as saving the day.
and we have less of that in this book. So I mean, Americans are part of the book. It is mentioned, that they come in the end. They're coming through the concentration camps and stuff, and bringing people to the American Red Cross. But we're not presented so much as like the heroes in this. We're Americans are presented as like part of the war at some point because we were, and that's kind of it. And I like that. Um, but so France was a big part of World War One.
Yeah.
They don't have a lot left by the time World War Two comes around, and I think we see that in
No,
the father.
there's not a lot left in the tank for France, which I it is
And
also a thing that
we see that with the girl's father, that he has come back very broken from World War One. He's struggling, he's struggling with alcoholism. And I think that I think we're meant to see a little bit of France in him, as and not meant to see it as like, well, the Germans came in and France just rolled over. It's just like, to your point, like how much capacity do they have left to deal with the Germans
because
again?
that also is a very American media thing is to immediately go for the jugular with France of just sort of like you'd be speaking German if it wasn't for us.
Yes, and I think I want to say we talked about that in Slaughterhouse-Five too, that there
Yeah.
is that very like American, we see that a lot in American media. That we see a lot of that attitude from Americans of, we came in and saved the day. Yeah, you'd be speaking German if it weren't for us.
And it's
Um,
not it's not it is it is not accurate necessarily. I mean, I suppose like America's contribution to World War II was deeply important, but it leaves out the fact that like France carried a lot of water in World War One, and like economically, they were pretty devastated. Just the amount of bodies they had left, they were pretty depleted. So then World War II rolls along, and just they are not in prime fighting shape by the time World War II starts.
Right. And I think that, and so I think that's something that's interesting in this book, especially to have been written by an American, is to take more of a European lens to
which
World War
is
II and
which
to
is
what's
interesting.
going on.
There's
And
more of
that
it now, but you just don't, as an American, you just don't read a lot of stories from the point of view of someone else in World War II because, I mean, everybody's telling the story that is most, relevant for them, of course, but there is more of it now. We've seen The Book Thief and All the Light We Cannot See. The film Jojo Rabbit came out all around this time. There's more of it than there used to be, but it's still not really how American authors, directors, whatever, tell the story of World War II.
exactly. And this book focuses, we're not focused so much on the fighting, right? We're not focused so much on the battle and on the army and on the soldiers. That's not a huge part of the story. We see the impact on Jews and that progression. That is certainly a part of the story, especially in Rachel's story, and Vian trying to help out her friend Rachel, who is Jewish. And we don't see a huge sort of focus on the concentration camps. Something that I think is the more of a focus in this book is sort of the impact on daily European life. That's a lot of what we're getting in Vian's story, and I think that's also sort of an interesting take of we it's so valuable and we should absolutely be talking about these big impacts on what was happening with the concentration camps, what was happening to the Jewish community during this time. But like I do think it's really interesting to kind of look at like, well, what was it like if you weren't Jewish and you lived in France and you lived in, in German occupied, Nazi occupied countries, what was that like for you? And then we see in these two women smaller contributions
We also
towards what's
see
going on.
the
That they're not these like large heroic stories, which again is another thing that we see in World War II. We see by smaller contributions. I mean, they're not again. It's not these like huge heroic stories that we see in books and movies a lot of times about World War II. They're quieter stories. Quieter is probably a better way to say it than small.
we also
We
see
see
the
these
dis
quieter contributions.
we see the disbelief also from the French people when Isabel goes to whatever you can make some money at the German headquarters doing some kind of administrative paperwork and she gets there and they're just picking Jews names out of all of the like residence files. When we see Isabel try and take those two kids in the apartment building because the children and the mother are Jewish and are being taken away by German soldiers, and the mother's just sort of like, I'm not leaving my kids with you. Are you out of your mind? My kids stay with me. We see the disbelief because like that's
Yes.
not because the we see the disbelief that everyone had for it, and because we start with Captain Beck sort of coming in and like billeting at Les Jardins when Isabel and Vianne and Sophie are just there by themselves. We see the inches by which this happened, right? That like this happens and they're all just like, well, crap, the Germans. Okay, shit, fine, they live here now, they're around. And then like, we just need you to write down the names of your Jewish colleagues. We just need to know who they are. It's a tally. We need to know who everyone is. And like that happens. And you see the people like not believe that something worse is coming, that it's just this sort of inch by inch loss that is taking place over the course of a grinding war that goes on like month over month, year over year. Um, Captain Beck gets there. Isabel is immediately not nice to him. I wanted to throttle Isabel during the part where the Germans are now in France. She knows it. They're in Les Jardins, and one of them is just coming to live in the house, and she just will not get it together. That like I don't know, man. You can't like talk to them this way. Like we've surrendered. We've been taken over. You can't do this. And Vianne's like
Yes.
furious with her because she's like, my daughter lives here. Like I need to go along and get along to like protect my daughter. Like I can't make waves. I can't like be problematic. I can't just be screaming and yelling at everybody because I'm upset about this happening. Both I can't have my daughter seeing it, but also like I need to keep things as calm as possible so she lives.
Yes, and that's like maybe when we see some of this, like we know we were talking about Vian um is very, with this honest perspective in the beginning of the book that she's not done right by Isabel when Isabel was younger, but then we do see this tension between them. And I'm with you. Like I think Vian, like, you know, Isabel's kind of looking at it as like, oh, but like we have to resist. And Vian is presented in this way as like not being very strong. And this is a little bit of, I think, maybe a critique of something in this book is that Vian's character is not consistent throughout the book. She's kind of
No.
presented as weak at some points and stronger at other points. So there is this tension, I think, between them and like, oh, Vian's weak, Vian's weak, Vian thinks that she's weak, but it's also, to your point, Vian has a child to think about, and Isabel doesn't. Isabel is able to sort of make decisions for herself. If Isabel wants to put her life in danger and make these impetuous decisions, and she wants to join the resistance, and that's fine, and that's admirable for Isabel. But Isabel has one person to think of, and it's Isabel. Vian has a daughter. She has a young daughter that she's concerned about keeping
She's got a
safe and
husband.
fed and
She,
alive. She has a
she
husband
also,
in the front
POW,
lines who like she would like to come home.
he's a prisoner of war for most of this. Like they know his name, they know where he is. Like
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, you're right.
like the Germans have leverage over her both for her husband and her daughter. Not even her, like her own life, of course, but then the two people she cares most about. At the same time, one they've already captured, and they got the other one's 8 or however old Sophie's supposed to be.
Right. And she has a German in her house. And, the option is to abandon her home and have nowhere to go, or to stay there with a German. And this, we could talk about Beck a little bit. Um,
Let's talk about Beck because I think you're right. I think Vianne's character is inconsistent in general. Like I think the things with her and Isabel are really good, but I liked Vianne because realistically Vianne is like me if this happens, right? Like presuming I'm not like sent off to like fight the front lines, but like the average schmo who's home, like who isn't involved in politics and isn't necessarily able to go out and do something. She's the everyman or the everywoman in the case of this book. Um, I don't know. And she's going on and on about Antoine, and then Captain Beck moves in, and within like a week, she's like, "Oh, ooh la la, this strong man in my house. I'm having such urges." It undermined her character in a way that like I just found unnecessary. Like there's no payoff for it.
so I agree with that because Beck is an interesting character because he he is German, he is a Nazi, but he's nice. He's nice to her. He does put her in some awkward situations, like asking her to write down the name of like, the Jewish people she knows in town, and that includes her best friend Rachel. So I'm not. He's a Nazi, but he's kind to her,
Yeah.
and he expresses some distaste at what's going on. You can kind of see that this is a man who's like, yeah, this isn't like quite what I signed up for. He misses his own children, his own wife and his own children. We get a little bit of like humanity. We get a little bit of this picture of like some of you know some of these Nazis are also just people who had jobs and were part of the army and have found themselves in this situation. So it's like we are sort of given this like interesting perspective, I think, on what we all know in our perspective now as just like the ultimate bad guys and the ultimate villains. But I also think that there's a little bit lost in the fact that there's this like romantic like frisson between Beck and Vianne.
It doesn't
They
need
could
to
have
be
just
there.
had they could have
Yeah.
just had like empathy and this like sort of friendship with each other. I think that would have been interesting enough.
I think it would have been more interesting. I think it's a little bit like easy and I'll say cheap to just be like, oh my God, she wanted to kiss him so badly. Like, yo, what your husband hasn't been gone that long, man. Your country's been taken over. Your sister got bombed.
This guy
Like,
also
this is,
just came into your house and was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna live here, and if you don't want to live here, you can just leave, and
yeah.
then I'll just be here in your house." And I mean, he's very nice about it. We do see nice things. He's bringing food home. Um, he helps her. He's trying to help Rachel. He tells her how to like go to the like when Rachel's trying to escape over into like free
Yeah,
France or whatever, right? Like he tells her like, okay, if you go this way,
he
he's
is.
trying
I
to give her a heads up. He's trying to like, he realizes that he's like really stepped in it with like all this Nazi stuff, and he is trying to
I mean, he is rounding
um
up Jews and following orders. I don't want to give him too much
we can't give
leeway,
him too much credit, but he is trying to
but
be
Beck is a real C minus student of Nazism. Like he is every they say in the book, because at this point Isabel is distributing leaflets and resistance literature all around Les Jardins, and they mention that it happens every Friday morning. All of the mailboxes get filled with this stuff, and every Friday morning Isabel is getting up and sneaking out of the house. Not even sneaking, she just leaves the house earlier than anyone else, and like he never puts that together.
right.
To be fair, none of the Nazis like just go and wait by a mailbox on a Friday to see who comes along. But um, he's he's a real D plus student, C minus student when it comes to being a Nazi. Like
Yes.
he's not their best and brightest.
But I'm with you that I felt like that little romantic connection between them. I could have done without that. And you're right that it does undermine Vianne's character because it
Yeah.
happens quick.
It also doesn't come up ever again. It leads to nothing, and
It does not have an impact later. So like
no,
when the
it doesn't tell
story,
us anything
if we're
about
moving
Vienne.
right, if we're moving along with the plot a little bit, um, Isabel gets more involved with the resistance. She's helping to bring airmen through the Pyrenees. She's back in the Loire Valley where Les Jardins is, and an airman comes down, and she makes the poor decision to shelter him in the barn, like in the cellar underneath
Yeah.
the barn, which leads to
She
Beck being shot.
she's been doing this for a while, by the way, at this point. So she leaves her sister's place. She goes back to Paris. She tells her father, just, TS, buddy, I'm staying here. You can't send me away again. She, her little leaflet thing in Les Jardins has like, she graduates to the resistance in Paris, and they let her in, and she finds an airman crouching in the bushes outside someone's house. I don't know, like 48 hours after she gets back. And she hides him in apparently there's a secret room in her childhood bedroom just big enough to hide an airman. Um, but doing that gets her like started on the path to eventually she is the person like coordinating along with her group, but like getting all of these guys, these airmen that people are finding who are like either planes get shot down, they parachute down somewhere into France, Americans, Brits, the Allies, leading them over the Pyrenees into Spain,
Into Spain, yeah.
where they can be dropped off at an embassy and shipped back so that they can fly more missions and help keep fighting the Nazis. And she is near Les Jardins. Her sister doesn't know she's there in the midst of her spy activity when she finds a busted up airman in the woods not too far from the old family farm.
Right.
And then yeah,
And that leads us to this I don't want to say the first big action,
it's
but a little bit. I mean,
well, we've gone over the Pyrenees at this point, which
we've
is
gone over the
pretty.
Pyrenees at this point, but this is big action because Beck dies, Beck is killed. So now everyone, knows that this Nazi has been belaying at Les Jardins, and now he's just, he's disappeared. And it is again a conflict between Vianne and Isabel. Vianne's angry at Isabel for putting her daughter in danger
Yeah,
in this capacity, which again is
no,
I get it.
I'm
I get it,
the.
Vianne. I do.
I mean, Vienne has also though like she's told Captain Beck for no discernible reason that there is a secret space under the Renault in the garage. She's just let
No, I
that
don't.
out. No, she told him. That's how he knows to go look for out there.
Oh, because Rachel was there. That's why he knows.
She says at one point to him that she should have hidden Rachel down there. Like she's just she's
No, I think she does hide Rachel down there.
Maybe she does for a little bit. Vianne is not,
She does. She hides Rachel down there after Rachel tries to cross the border and her daughter is killed at the border.
yeah. Vianne does not
She hides
really
she
get
hides
on
Rachel
board.
and Rachel's son, who becomes Daniel.
Yes.
Although in French it would be Danielle. She hides Rachel and Danielle down there, but she doesn't hide them down there long enough. Rachel wants to come up and they come and get her. If she had been down there for a few more hours or,
Yeah.
into the next day, they wouldn't have come and taken her. They wouldn't have come and taken her for the concentration camp, and she leaves her son with Vianne.
Um,
So that's how
yeah.
he knows that that cellar is there.
She says to him that I should have kept Rachel down there. She lets him know about it though.
She lets him
Sh
know about it in some capacity. Yes, because she's let her guard down. But again, they don't have to have this like romantic prison between them. A friendship would have been enough. He's kind to her, he's trying to help her
yeah.
out. They
I mean,
are in similar
he does.
situations of wishing that like their loved ones were closer to them and that they were in different situations. And I think that's enough. And I'm with you. The
Yeah, it's a.
romance aspect of it does feel a little cheap.
I mean, I don't know if it's just. I don't know if it's there to just make Vianne seem a little dopey to like. I'm not sure. It's everyone in town suspects her of like hooking up with this guy and is all mad at her and like kind of shuns her. And she's like, ah, how could they do this to me? But she does like, she is going through this like, she's going through this struggle of her feelings for this Nazi who is part of the people who have her husband as a prisoner of war and has taken over her country. And he made her write down all the names of the Jewish people she knows, which she did. I will say,
And this again is some of that inconsistency of character
yeah,
in Vian.
she couldn't apologize to her sister for like not being there for her when they were younger. She does immediately go and apologize to Rachel for like turning her over to the Nazis.
Yeah.
She does that right away and just leaves Isabel kind of dangling. But yeah, it's a part of the. It bothers me because I don't think it's necessary for Vianne to be this way, and I don't think that the love story or the not even the, it's not a love story. What is it? It's an unrealized romantic tension between her and Captain Beck. Like just feels
But
superfluous.
this is where we see this book being a little where this is where we kind of see, I think, some of this book leaning a little bit more towards like entertainment value.
Yes, I
Right,
mean,
because in a movie, if we're making this into, our limited series on Netflix, or we're making this into a movie, that stuff is in there. Movies, TV shows, I think, and this is I guess a little less these days because there is so much content out now. But previously, TV and movies hit a bigger audience usually than books, right? So it's like I feel like things get I feel like books, I feel like a big complaint for people that are readers and then see something that they've read made into a movie. Part of, I think, what we respond to that we don't necessarily like is that it gets dumbed down a little bit.
yeah,
And
it's
some of
too.
that is just in this book. And I think that is an example of it.
We if when we get the money and we start our own streaming network, that's the one that is just going to like the book is the script. You just film the book straight through. That's
100%.
yeah, like
And if
the
it's too long to be a movie, limited series.
limited series. Yeah, just
Limited
like the
series. You don't have
yeah,
to cut anything out. And we don't
yeah,
don't. And you know who doesn't need to have romantic tension? Vianna and Beck.
yeah. They don't. Beck gets shot though because Vianne does in the moment of crisis when like Beck discovers her sister in the basement with the now dead airman. Um, he goes to shoot her and it kind of happens simultaneously, right? Like I think Isabel gets a shot off because she'd hidden the shotgun down there. Um, but Vianne just goes at the back of his head with the axe, right? Like she just
With an
axes
axe or at least a blunt, heavy object.
a
And
sledgehammer or something.
I do like that there's a little bit of like argument back and forth, but like, I killed him. No, I killed him. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure I killed him. No, I think it was me.
By the way, it it works out. No one really is looking for. They don't really need it. No one's really looking for Captain Beck. Um,
Not because he's kind of a D-list Nazi.
yeah,
But
he's
then we get but then we get von Richter.
we should also mention Gaetan has come back at this point, and it turns out Gaetan is like leading the resistance group that Isabel is a part of. It also turns out her father is the one forging all the papers for everybody in the resistance group.
Yes, that he is also
Yeah.
part of the resistance, and that this is the reason that he has gotten rid of Isabel this time.
Yes, because he didn't want to have her
Well,
in
doesn't
the
want to put her
way
in
of the
danger.
trouble. Yeah, doesn't want to put her in the danger.
So this is
But
we do find out that this is sort of his first act as like a decent father, right? That it's like, in this case, I'm not sending you away because I'm not a good father. I'm sending you away because I am concerned about your safety. And then I think also he sees a little bit of her, like in her like impetuousness. I think he sees some of himself in there and maybe knows that she would want to participate.
I add, there is no part of this book where we cut back to the Isabel scenes where we are not immediately reminded that she is impetuous.
And
If
beautiful.
she's not, and beautiful, if she's not saying it, someone else is saying it over and over again. And like, I gotta tell you, I could just, I can remember. I,
Yeah, no, I'm with you. We do get beat over the head with that a little bit, and like
yeah,
her beauty and her looks we hear about over and over again,
but that's part of, I suppose,
and that's part of like
the commercial
why
appeal of
it
of a book like
is.
this is the,
But I don't love that like part of her like, no, I can do it because I'm pretty, and everybody will just like let me get away with something because I'm pretty. Is like maybe we focus a little bit more on the fact that you can get away with things because you're clever
you're smart and
and you're smart and you're brave. Like,
you're working with a good team of people who are like also all like putting things together and getting it on the line. You've got a good network you've gotten involved in. But they really, Kristen Hanna just goes for the like, she's so hot. She's so ridiculously
yeah,
hot.
and I mean, is there a little bit of that? What do they call it? Like the like pretty pe
Pretty privilege.
pretty privilege. Thank you. That's the word. Yes, that's exactly what I was looking for. Like it's not that pretty privilege can't be mentioned once or twice. It is not unheard of that like, oh, I think Nazis are still men. You think they're going to stop paying attention for a minute because like a hot girl is like a little bit of smoke and mirrors? Like, yeah, that tracks. That's fine. It's the amount that it gets brought up.
Oh my God. Yeah.
It's the amount that it gets brought up. For sure.
So she leads these people. All right. So yeah, Beck gets killed, and that's when it's not von Sprunk, but I want it to be. What's his
You
name?
do, but it's von Richter.
Von Richter. A new Nazi comes to billet, and now it's the sort of Nazi that we expect. It is a cruel and capricious man who eventually threatens Vianne's daughter's life and safety if she doesn't start sleeping with
And
him.
Danielle
And
is at
Danielle,
this
who
so at
she's
this
taken
point,
in at
right?
this point.
She is hiding a Jewish child. She's also at this point when von Richter comes to live with them. So she is hiding a Jewish child in her home, Rachel's son. She is helping Mother Superior at the convent also to hide some Jewish children sort of in plain sight as orphans, right? So she's got
Yeah,
like a little rubric going on to kind of keep track of like she's giving them different names. They're there under the guise of being orphans and not Jewish
she's getting,
to help protect these children. So at this point, we do see this little bit of bravery in Vianne. She is Sophie's older at this point. Like, time is interesting in this book.
yes, it is.
We spend a lot sometimes we spend a long amount of time sometimes we spend a lot of pages on a short amount of time, and sometimes we spend a short amount of pages on a longer amount of time. So the way time moves in this book is not always very straightforward, I don't think,
No, it just,
but Sophie has gotten older. Sophie is sort of aware of what's going on with these children, and yes, so von Richter begins to threaten the lives of both of her children, and she does come to consider Danielle her child, right? I mean, she needs to keep up that ruse for one. She's been there his whole life because it's Rachel's son and she loves him, but I mean, they also spend years together of her caring for him and
oh
keeping him
yeah.
alive in a very difficult time, and so he does threaten the lives of both of her children, which leads to her having this sexual arrangement with him. I don't want to use the word romance because I don't think there's any romance in being basically
No,
blackmailed into sleeping with
y-
somebody.
yeah, it's rape. Um, it is couched in the fact that like he demands she act like she's okay with it,
Yeah,
or he will hurt the children. Like he squeezes some sort of like extra what is it? A lack of resistance and a sort of pantomime of um being okay with it out of her, or he'll go after Sophie and start looking at the paperwork of Daniel. And she is at this point bringing children out to Mother Superior, where they're like have this orphanage of allegedly French children, non-Jews, who they're Isabel's first contact in Le Jardin, Henri or Henry for the American ear, um, is getting papers for her.
right.
Uh,
And Henri is part of um the same
that
group of
was
people as Isabel and
yeah,
Vian's father.
yes, yes, they're all in the resistance. Um, every everyone that they bump into, it turns out, is like a little piece of the resistance. Um, yeah, because we also suddenly open up, we're like, we cut to Isabel, and it turns out she's crossed the Pyrenees at this point like 27 times. And at this point now, the Germans know about the Nightingale and are looking for the Nightingale. So, not to not to overly pick at the nits,
We can pick some nits though.
I want to pick a few nits here. The they go on in this book about the need for secrecy and the need for like because you'll be tortured and you have to try to hold out for 48 hours, and that'll give everyone time to like get away, and like how dangerous it is and how important the secrecy is, how important. They call her the Nightingale.
And that's what Rosignol means.
Yes, so like when you're reading it, you're like the Nightingale, Isabel Rossignol, because you're an American, but like in the context of the way this is playing out, it's just Rossignol. They call her by her last name. That is that is the laxest security you could possibly have. Like,
That thought occurred to me as well on being like, why would they give her that name? Why wouldn't she be legitimately anything else?
no, it's like
You
like
can
in
make a code
college,
name
like
out of anything.
yes, no, any code name that's not my literal last name would be preferable
She could be the
to
baguette or something if we're gonna go so
yes,
French, Kristen Hanna. You know what I mean? Like,
the fox, the like go with her hotness, whatever, like so, something that isn't her literal last name. It's like if you and I were doing this here in the States and like they were looking for the Weibel, I would ask that my compatriots and people pick a different moniker. Don't
yeah, I'm
pick
with you.
like I
Could
feel
we
like I'm going to be
let's go with
found,
something else?
but the Nazis are never just sort of like, you know who we should talk to? These Nightingales. Mr. Papa Nightingale and his daughter Nightingale that live here in Paris. I I wonder if they're up to it. It's the worst code name.
Agreed.
Um, let's talk a little bit more since we talked about the Beck like unresolved romantic tension. Isabel's love story with Gaetan, I 100% would forget that this dude was even in the book. Like all of a sudden she'd be outside, she'd be like, he's watching me, and then Gaetan would step from the shadows and be like, ho, 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 do not say you love me, Isabella. You cannot say it. I cannot hear it. Do not say. And I'd be like, who? Who is this? And then he's in it so little.
So two things.
And he
One,
also, I'm sorry, just to
go
finish,
ahead.
the bizarre resistance to the his whole thing of this, like we can't say we love each other. It's World War II. We can't, can't do that. Like we can't be in love. I don't see why not. Get it while the getting's good, man. Like love the one you're with. You could both be dead at any second.
Yeah, you're both taking extreme risks and you could die, so you may as well have something nice before that happens.
Yeah, I don't think it's super realistic, and I also just I don't I his whole thing of just like I I thought it would make us vulnerable if we were too much in love. Like, I think it's the taking the guys over the Pyrenees is really what's the vulnerability. I think it's the defiance of the Nazis. I don't think it's just like hanging around Isabel a little bit. But
Yeah, I feel like you got bigger fish to fry here.
but again, it's a love story we're just told. It's just like she just announces at one point after he's had maybe 6 or 7 words of dialogue. She's just like, I'm in love with this guy. Like, there's no,
That's something that I was going to comment on as well, is that their love story is definitely something that we are told and not really like shown.
yeah, I don't, I mean,
It again, I think is in there for like the entertainment value of like, well, it's a story about women, so we got to put, and women are going to read this book, so like we got to put some love in there. If you had lifted the Gaetan love story out for me, I would not be like, I wouldn't have finished this book and been like, man, I really wish she'd given Isabel a boyfriend at some point. Like that part of the story you could lift that and the framing device. You'll notice that we have not come
yeah,
back to talk about the framing device again.
I don't
The
need
love
it.
story with Isabel and the framing device with the old woman could both of those things could lift out of this novel, take a few pages out of it, and I think that this book would be just as good. I think the story would be just as good.
The usually if you put a framing device like that around a story like this, I think you're trying to add an element of mystery, like which sister is it? And I was never curious which one.
Well, and
Like, first of all, the
there's no
fact that
big reveal. Nothing like in my opinion, nothing comes from like
no,
once we swing back to the framing device in the end, like nothing there's no reveal from it that I was like, oh, I mean, we find out that Isabel dies after she's rescued from the concentration camp. She dies there at Les Hardin when Gaetan comes back. And so like that's a reveal, I guess, but like that also just could have happened in that scene and it still would have had an impact on me. I
yeah,
didn't
I
need for it to
was
be in the framing device. Like nothing comes from the framing device that it was like, oh, that's why we've been going back and forth in time. That didn't feel super meaningful to me.
no, not at all. I wasn't really curious which one it was before we found out. And then it's like a third of the way through the novel, you kind of put together that the old woman who's reminiscing is sort of wishy-washy and like doing things that don't make any sense. And you're like, oh, that's Vianne.
I'll be honest that even though this is the second time I read this book, I forgot about the framing device. And like I remember when I started it the second time being like, wait a minute, which sister is this? And I like for the life of me could not recall.
Yeah, it's not super important. And I mean, I guess there's a
I
sort
mean, I
of
guess then at some point in the book I did remember that it was like, oh wait, no, Isabel dies, so this must be Vianne. But like I said, I read this book. I didn't read it. I mean, I guess I read it kind of a long time ago, but I don't know. I didn't read it like 15 years ago. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I think it's just in there so that we can have the surviving cast of characters come back out and take a bow at the end when she goes to the. Although, but again, I don't know what you need the framing device. Could just be we cut to the future and Vianne's going to this thing.
yeah,
But
no, I'm with you. I don't think I really that did not feel like a thing we needed.
it's just so we can see Gaetan and his like incredibly hot daughter and uh what is it, Daniel when he's older. And she refers to him as a young man. I think he's like 60. But
Yeah, Daniel would be older by by this point. Yeah, that could have lifted out for me.
yeah, there's no
It's nice that she gets to like reconnect with Daniel at some point and we get that reveal on like, oh, I have this picture of you and she gives him a picture of her and Rachel before before Daniel's
yeah.
taken away from her in the end and that's a nice moment. But like,
I was happy that he got to see her again. I got for this is a book that like wanted me to feel emotional at various points, and most of them did not particularly work on me. But Daniel being taken away at the end, like I have a little boy, so like things with little boys don't that works on me. Like Daniel just being scared and upset and sad as they take him away at the end was the part that like got me in the heart a little bit. So I was happy to see him like get to meet her again.
Yeah, that was nice, but I don't that framing. But like I said, the framing device didn't it
No,
didn't do
take
a
it
lot
out.
for me.
Yeah, it didn't need to be there. Um, that and both love stories. I think the thing is, if you wanted to put in a love story, even if it's for the sort of cynical commercial reason of like chicks like that, I'm putting quotes around it, that statement. Um, just put one in, make it a love story. Like Gaetan's four, what does he have? Like four scenes of page time? Like he's barely in it.
Yeah, no,
And
again, it's
he's the whole
something.
time he's just like, oh, you cannot love me, Isabel. Like just make him love her. Just make it a love story.
Yeah,
Just do it.
yeah. Again, it was something that was like throw it that felt like it was thrown in there for entertainment value and not for like actual literary value or like
Yeah,
story
they
value.
just make it more entertaining though. Because the thing is, when both of them happened, um, I thought this was going to be one of those books, like Colleen Hoover books, where like it's like this sort of story driven plot, and then there's like graphic sex. Like that's what I thought we were going with both of these. It's super chaste. Like the
Oh
whole
yeah, no. There's no big reveal. We're just told that they're in love. Oh, okay, and then their love prevails even through the concentration camps. So, so we're moving along with the
it
plot.
also ends on it. She tells Gaetan tells her that he loves her. He just never wanted to say it while the war was going on because he didn't know whatever his thing is. And she tells him that she loves him, and then she dies in his arms
Yep.
in front of her sister and Sophie.
And we don't
And
even get to see that. We learn
no, we
later that
don't. We
that's
learn
what
it later. Yeah,
happens.
yeah.
We learn later that she dies, like the way the scene ends is it's like, okay, do they all get to live together at Les Jardins now and she gets better? That would be nice.
But
Like,
when they film it, she's going to collapse in his arms, and then the camera is going to zoom back out a drone shot up into the air where we see all the figures in the back of the and like the devastated war scene of France, growing as the camera goes higher and higher and higher, and that's the
and
climactic
that's
end.
powerful, but in reading it,
That was
yeah,
annoying.
it would have been more powerful for it to have been
Yeah,
described it in that moment instead of like finding out when we're like, oh, okay, God, we're back. All right, we're back with this old woman and like what's going on? And then we find out that Isabel dies. Yeah, I could have done without that. And let's go along with our plot. So, Isabel does she does get caught
she
as
does
the
get caught,
Nightingale. She's being tortured and questioned, and Vianne gets a surprise visit from her father, who we haven't heard from for a little while at this point, and he comes to apologize. So for the first time, in her whole life, he comes to sort of like make amends, admit that he wasn't a great dad, and to apologize for that. And for her to sort of know that the way he is going to make amends is to sacrifice himself as the Nightingale.
which he does. And so they don't exactly let Isabel go, but they don't kill her and they send her off to,
Buchenwald, I think.
I'm sorry,
Buchenwald.
Buchenwald. Yeah,
She goes to more than one.
yeah, they shuttle her
Maybe
around
one.
a
Maybe
bit.
she goes to Ravensbrook. I think she goes
Uh,
to both.
they, but then the Americans come in and the war ends. Von Richter goes off scot-free, which is a sort of realistic and disappointing like thing that she added to the novel was this that like not all the bad guys get shot in the face with a shotgun and hit in the head with an axe. Some of them just go back to Germany. Uh, and Vianne is left pregnant by rape, but from von Richter. And her husband comes home just in time for her to sort of pretend the kid is his.
And they both just kind of agree to like not talk about it. They both and so they've struggled to get pregnant, right? Like
Yeah,
Sophie's kind of this miracle baby. She's had three or four miscarriages through the years, and so it is kind of this ugly um it's kind of this ugly thing, right? That this is how she gets pregnant and has it, and has another baby, but they both just kind of agree like let's just put Pat it's been a real bad time for both of us. Let's just sort of move forward with this miracle. We've wanted another kid, and they just kind of agree to not.
To never speak
ever
of it.
talk about it and never speak of it.
And and that's the end.
And right, is Isabel comes home, she's in pretty bad shape. And
Dies
then
in
yes,
Gatan's arms, and
dies in Gatan's arms, and then we go back to
our
our
framing
framing.
device where old Vianne is going to a sort of celebratory honorific dinner for all of these people who participated in the resistance, particularly like sort of the women who like contributed to the victory in resisting the Germans during the war. And her son follows her there, and and it's the son from von Richter, of course, and that's the first time he hears any of these things about his mother or his Aunt Isabel, um, which I think is weird, but like she didn't tell him. He clearly knows how old she is and that she's from France and how old he is. Like he went to school, he's a doctor.
Right, exactly. I feel like he knows enough. I feel like he knows about enough about history to know that she lived through Nazi occupied France.
Yeah, but she didn't tell him until this moment, and then we have the sort of I think my least favorite line in the whole book is when she gets up and she gives this speech, and then he comes up to her afterwards like, I guess we have a lot to talk about, huh, Mom? I'm like, ew, dumb,
Yeah, I that
dumb. I'm sorry,
yeah.
dumb. And then we end on the sort of like, love pulls us through all of this, kind of thing. I have a question. So this was fine. I enjoyed reading it. It's again not something I would have picked up on my own. It was fine. I liked it. The popularity of this, though, seems to outweigh the story. And I don't even mean just because it's a popular novel that is like meant to be read quickly and as an entertainment. I just mean like when those Colleen Hoover books are like coming out and they're really big, there's like hardcore sex in them. Like there's pornography in the book and like that I get that, right? Like you're reading this whatever kind of story, but there's graphic sex. I see why that's popular. The Da Vinci Code phenomenon posits the idea of in a Christian nation that the Virgin Mary was not a virgin for her whole life, and that Jesus had brothers and sisters, and that his family line, is still going on. I get that, right? Like you kind of shock to the system of what we thought and like kind of how we perceive Christianity. Um, all these things like have a thing that like rockets something that you can point to that explains why they pop off. There's nothing like that in here. We there's no I don't know like new information about World War II that challenges all preconceived ideas about World War II. There's no hardcore sex. There's there isn't one of those things. Do you know what I'm talking about?
There's not even, I mean, like the love story isn't so great as we've discussed, that the love story kind of lifts out, the framing device kind of lifts out. There is not,
There's not even
the
like
framing device doesn't have some giant reveal that we're all
yeah,
shocked to learn.
Sophie's Choice where like the term itself, Sophie's Choice, has entered like the cultural dialogue, like just like it's a piece of our lexicon at this point, where the this horrible decision this woman has to make uh, at the gates of a concentration camp haunts her for. There's not even like a point of horror or anything in it. It's fine. It's completely fine, and it's just strange that it was as big as it was
I
because
I
it's just
agree with
fine. It's a
you.
fine story, like, but it's just not special.
I agree with you. I don't know what really can be pointed to be like this is the reason that that this book is so popular. But I will say, um,
Like Twilight.
we're really heavy on like our female protagonists here. You know, the men in this book are very like secondary, they're tertiary characters. They're all just kind of there to they're all supporting characters. The main characters and who we know, you know, the most about and care the most about through this book are women. They are, again, it's not like this is a story about like like these like absolutely amazing heroics like we're presented with in World War II a lot. It is again these like quieter contributions that these women have made. And so, I mean, I think that's something that people, I think that's something that women, because I do think that women are a lot of who has made this book really popular.
I think that's
So
true. I thought
that's,
the
I mean,
thing
so
with
that's
Beck,
something to point to. But I am kind of with you that, like, as I have to say, in like rereading this, I did also kind of have that feeling of like, my God, like I said, I remember when I was reading this, like multiple times, people coming up to be like, "Oh my God, the Nightingale, it was amazing. I loved it. Are you loving it?" Like people talk to me about this book a lot when I
I
was reading it.
I thought it was going to be an affair with Beck. I thought that was going to like keep going into something that was the sort of like since the sensational aspect of it. That's what it is. It didn't have a sensational aspect. Even Twilight uses like a long held erotic premise of an older guy like taking a young girl that he's far too old for like as a romantic partner, and it's couched and kind of hidden behind this veil of like he looks like a teenager, and they
And
both
is
make a
also a
decision.
virgin.
Yes, they both make a decision to like stay virgins, and that is the sort of smoke screen behind what is in fact like a very Nabokovian, like just it's a deeply older man taking a younger girl. He has all this experience and she's like an ingenue, and he like opens her up to a world she never knew. It's they
Yeah,
masked it a
no,
little
I
bit
get
so
it. No,
that
you're right. There is not, that is an
they
interesting
masked it
thing.
so like CYO girls could read it and like stuff like that. But that is what drove the popularity of that is that deep down we all know there's an older guy with a teenager. It's a Lolita's like the novel, a Lolita style relationship going on in that. And there's no I thought the Beck thing was going to be it, but it doesn't deliver. Is it just the nostalgia? Is it just that like this is couched not even in nostalgia for it's nostalgia for media about World War II, right? Like
Yes,
this
like I said, World War II historical fiction always goes a long way. But I mean, there are, there's sister relationships in here. The father he's been this horrible father all of these years, and then he sacrifices himself for one of them. We have a good Nazi that we have like conflicted feelings about when we're reading about back on, like, oh, I don't know, like he's kind of nice. Do I like him? Like, do I kind of like this guy? But like you can't like a character if he's a Nazi. So we get these conflicting feelings about Beck. And then we have Von Richter, who's exactly what we think of and know. Um
is
and
it
like
that?
a
Is it just that there's not there's not a lot of female driven World War II pieces of media and like they just that audience was just sort of like, "Oh, finally."
I do want
Like
to say that that's part of it. I think that Kristen Hanna also just I think she is also just somebody who's a popular author because she delivers like stories that people want to read and that are easy to read. Because that's another thing with this book. This book is easy to read. This book is easy to get through. It is plot driven, so it's like you go through the story, you don't slog through it,
no,
and that
that's true.
appeals to a lot of people.
The accessibility of it, I suppose. Because like when I'm saying that it's like a nostalgia, I what I mean is that I think you're right. I think it's the accessibility of it because it does it trades on a nostalgia, but it's not like live nostalgia like you miss the 80s. It's nostalgia for the media and stories that you already know about World War II. It takes you back to a thing that has existed for you within the framework of stories you've already heard. Like you already know about World War II, you know about France, sisters, love at first sight, and it takes you back into a place like that that like is a comfortable and familiar area with a mildly new perspective, like coming as it does from two sisters in France. And so you don't need to actually know much history to connect with it. You just need to know about Indiana Jones. And the Nazis. You need to know about Emily in Paris, Sophie's Choice, like we mentioned, Beauty and the Beast, and I guess just the cultural absorption of France and World War II and these things makes it a comfortable, accessible place to have this like story of two sisters in difficult times kind of land for you, I guess.
Yeah.
You want to do categories?
Let's do our categories. We're
All right.
starting
Let's talk about the Bechdel test. Rebecca, does this book pass the Bechdel test?
This book very easily passes the Bechdel test. So again, we have our main players throughout this book are women. They're having tons of conversations that rarely actually sort of center around men or romance. And again, I do think that that is part of the
Yeah,
popularity of this book is to have something that is so female driven.
even the secondary characters are female. Like the men, I would say, are besides maybe Papa, the men are third line. Like as far as it comes up, like I mentioned, Gaetan is. I legitimately would forget that dude was in the book. Antoine is a concept at best. He's like just the husband who is away. Even what like Henri and the guy who shows her the way over the Pyrenees and all that are shadow characters. Like it's a very
Yeah.
female heavy book in every sense. Let's do the one stars. Chuck Taylor's one star reviews. Um, all right, so I will say the one stars are thin on this book. This is a beloved book. It is less than 1% of all the reviews are one stars. Almost everything is a 5 and 4. Like there's almost no 3 and 2 star reviews. Like it is a well-liked book. Um, but amongst those who do not like it, ongoing inconsistencies in the narrative is the thing that was mentioned the most. Um, Examples of this being so when Vianne and Isabel are first sent to Le Jardin, Vianne is 14 and Isabel's 4. And then in Vianne's narration, like she falls in love at 16 and gets pregnant at 16 and she miscarries at 17. And she's talking about her 17-year-old self sort of collapsing at the miscarriage, like after the miscarriage, and how she just didn't have time to take care of her 4-year-old sister. Um, just things like that where Vianne is aged 3 years and like just no one caught the fact that Isabel hasn't
Right.
in the same time period. And they're right. Isabel should be subject to moving forward in time. That's how that should work. Um, I get that though. I noticed them throughout the book. I noticed that Isabel didn't age. I noticed when Vienna is telling the story of her father taking them to Le Jardin for the first time. And she keeps talking about like having never been there and it's the first time we're there. And she makes the comment that like it became a prison instead of just our summer home. And like, which is it? The first time you've been here or it's your summer home that's been in your family for 300 years? Um, Isabel's memories, like Isabel remembers her mother and father in like striking detail, 4 years old. She also remembers, it's not Anouk. Who's the woman who owns the house that was her mother's dear friend? Um, who
I
owns the
can't
house where they
I
put the
can't remember
airmen
her
like
name,
at the foot of the
but
Pyrenees?
and she ends up in the concentration camp with her. They're
Isabel
together in the end of the
remembers,
book.
yes, Isabel remembers where that house is, remembers that woman who she hasn't seen since she was 3. Um, that's a thing. And it's kind of throughout. Like it's,
There are inconsistencies
no, and I
throughout the
get,
book, and in their easy things, they feel like an editor should have caught them.
yes, it feels like when you make this much money from books and we know that Kristen Hanna has a team of people who like work to get these out and keep making money on them. Like somebody should spot check these things.
Agreed.
Um, I f- I also found them distracting. Where like because the book moves so fast that when you stumble over one, like I would go back. Like, did I miss something? Oh no, it's literally just a mistake. Um, Second most popular complaint was that the need for the love story angle and the constant reminders of the two sisters' beauty, especially Isabel's, undermines the idea that this book seems to be like really trying to advocate for um, of women's heroics in the war and like the contributions that they made. I think that one is a smart take because while I do understand that like from a commercial aspect, like you kind of want to put these things in to make it a pop book and to make it the kind of thing somebody picks up before a flight and reads on the beach when they get wherever it is they're going. You are really advocating that like these are forgotten women and these stories don't get told and all of this. And you do kind of undercut it when Isabel just needs to be hot. Like,
Right. And I agree with that. We could have had these contributions. We could have seen what these women did, the relationship between the sisters. There's a lot, there's enough here that we didn't need to sprinkle this like these other things in for entertainment value.
no, and it would have given the author room to deepen the characters a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with
Um,
that.
and the third one is one that you and I specifically mentioned kind of when we were going through the plot was the inconsistency of Vianne's characters. We were not the only people who caught that. Um, and I think that is, we've talked about it is also true. Like, Vianne doesn't build towards courage, which is kind of the way it would go um, normally, right? In a book like this, a story-driven kind of pop fiction book, Vianne starts out weak and she works her way up to courage. But in this book, she's just sort of courageous when she needs to be. She's not when the scene needs her not to be. Like she just kind of waffles back and forth. And the writing doesn't support that as like as a character trait. Like it just sort of happens without any
Right.
explanation that like sometimes she's just telling Captain Beck anything he needs to know, and the next second she's like saving Jewish children, and then she's leaving Sophie behind. She's can't leave Sophie anywhere ever or whatever. And the next second she's like taking a train to like go see her sister when she gets captured. It's just sort of back and forth. Um, those are the three. I think all of them are legitimate complaints. I don't think they overall damage the type of book this is and like what the story is trying to tell, but they're all valid. I think these aren't like people kind of just picking on it to be picking on it. Uh, the cheap seats complaints that I don't dive into too much were cliched and sentimental writing. I just think when you pick this book up, you kind of know what you're getting in for. Like that's, I think,
I
kind of stock in trade for some genre fiction is it is going to be a
Yeah.
little bit mawkish and sentimental, and you're going to get some cliches when you do that because it makes it go down smooth.
Hmm.
And the other one was the sort of this is me saying it, but sort of the Disneyfication of the American view of what makes people French. Um, the one, I guess I will actually give a little air to this one. The two that I thought were very funny because I thought they were funny when I read them was when the kids do a little play and they're singing Frere Jacques, just because
Yeah.
that's clearly the only French children's song that Kristen Hanna knows, and she didn't want to bother to Google another one. Um, and when there's a hanged man in the village at one point, which is not in itself funny, but what is funny is that he's wearing a beret. He's been beaten by soldiers, hanged. The beret is still on.
And they still have the beret so that we know he's
Yeah, yeah,
French. Yeah.
yeah. So just to make sure that we know it's still France, that poor man's beret never came off in any of his trials or tribulations. Um, so those were the other complaints. Did you do the casting call?
Yes.
All right, who'd you do?
All right. So for Vianne, I was a little on the nose with my French, and it with my casting. So for Vianne, I cast Marianne Cotillard.
I love her, and she would be good as Vianne.
Hmm.
I cast Gal Gadot because I think she is an inconsistent actress, and I felt like being a little bitchy about it, and I thought that would work for the inconsistencies of Vianne's character because Gal Gadot is not a super consistent actor, in my opinion. For Isabel, though, I did Cher.
I'm gonna need you to explain that one.
I think the part where like they keep talking about like the most stunning beauty in all of France, probably people don't immediately go to Cher, though she is a striking, obviously, individual. But since they were going on and talking about the impetuous at every possible chance, Isabel's impetuous. I don't think anyone plays that as well as Cher. Like from Mermaids to Mask, um, I, anything she's in, I think she can play headstrong, impetuous, like uh, characters just in an utterly believable way. Like I think like the kind of like headstrong, frustrating, but like ultimately um, lovable and like heroic sort of persona. I think she can nail that. I'm thinking like she needs to be younger, obviously, but you know the probably Mask era Cher. Like
Okay. All right. I can see that. I again went very French and on the nose. My Emily in Paris fans will appreciate this. For Isabel, I cast Camille Rosat, who is a French actress that looks as unbelievably like French beautiful as you can be. Just very like blonde hair, pale skin. Um, one of those girls that she just looks incredibly French. She looks like she could not have a stitch of makeup on and still be the most beautiful girl in the room. And when they really do her up with makeup and try to make her look nice, she's, still very French and the most beautiful girl in the room. And because that seems to be something that's talked about with Isabel repeatedly so much throughout the book, we're hit over the head with it so much that I found somebody whose beauty hits you over the head and also is very French.
I will say, I think the original casting for the sisters of Elle and Dakota Fanning was also a good call.
Yeah, I agree with that. If this gets made, I think they will. I think they'll be a good fit.
I mean, I don't know if they're. I mean, I don't actually know how old those two people are, if they're like still age appropriate for the characters, but I do like the fact that they're sisters.
I think so. I think they
Uh,
are.
so it was, and I'll sidetrack for a moment. It was the movie was planned. Uh, sort of hilariously, Mom brought it to my attention. Mom, who is not someone who usually knows what movie is coming out, but she loved this book, and she was like, she read somewhere there was going to be a film. She was promised a film, and she was waiting for it, which is how I heard about it because she kept asking me if I'd heard about it coming out yet. And I finally had to look it up. But it was going to be Dakota and Elle Fanning, and it was going to be directed by Melanie Laurent, who is French. Um, you might know her as Shoshana from Inglourious Bastards if you saw that movie. Um, I recently saw her in a movie called Oxygen. I think I might have even had her in one of our casting calls for a different book now that I'm thinking about it.
I think so too, because the name is familiar to me, and
I
I haven't seen Inglourious Bastards in quite some time, and I've never seen Oxygen.
I had just watched Oxygen when we did whatever episode that was, and she's the only person in the movie, and I was impressed by that. Um, Also, a fun fact that maybe just for me, uh, Melanie Laurent is married. Her husband is the guy who does the French dub for Ned Flanders on the French Simpsons, which which I like. Um, but when I was doing the research for this, the last thing I saw was that Melanie Laurent has dropped out and just moved on to something else. I think COVID shut down the development of the movie. I think the Fannings are still trying to get it put together, but I can't. Only COVID could. I can't believe this wasn't like a script before it was even in hardback. That they
I,
didn't just like
I'm
start printing it and have someone do the script like as it was printing the hardback versions. Like
yeah, I'm with you.
it's such a movie. It's written to be a movie.
I'm with you. I feel like this it reads like a screenplay.
I also cast Papa. Did you do Papa?
I didn't. Who did you do?
Gerard Depardieu.
On the nose.
Yeah, no, you got to bring out France's greatest leading man, I think, for that role. There's not a lot to it, but if anyone's going to make something out of it, I think it's Depardieu. If you can get him to come back from Russia, where he has the, he left France for Russia because he didn't want to pay taxes anymore, or whatever his problem was. Somehow, there's nothing more French to me than like getting so mad at the French government that you leave France.
That is very French. Yeah,
Like
that is
the
that does
Frenchest
seem
thing
particularly French.
the Frenchest thing you can do is like protest the French government by moving to Russia, I think, or just leaving France. Who'd you cast?
My last oh well, I cast Anouk as Jessica Chastain.
Oh, I like Jessica Chastain and everything.
I like her and everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I felt like Anouk. I don't know why she popped into my head. Something I was reading when I was reading this book was like, yeah, you know who I could see doing this role? Jessica Chastain.
Who
And
did
then my
you
other cast was Beck,
who do you have for Beck?
Alex Skarsgård. And he just looks very Aryan to me. He's just very like blonde, blue-eyed. And that's just kind of who I picture. That's who I picture being like
No, he
the
looks like
nice.
a Nazi. He's I'm sure he's
That's
I
who
mean,
that's who I picture
he's
being like
Nordic, but
the nice Nazi. You know what I mean? The guy who's like, no, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. What did I get myself into here? I wish I was home with my wife and kids in Germany and not participating in any of this. Like, so I could see that in Alex Skarsgård, but I mean, he is a good actor too. So it's like, we do see a little bit of a change in Beck. Um, Beck's job is being threatened because he can't find this airman. And so he kind of realizes, like, okay, well, there's only one place I haven't looked, and it's here. And what an idiot am I going to look like if it's
he's a
here, if
terrible
this guy is
Nazi.
here?
He's bad at his job.
And he does get angry and he does turn into a bad Nazi, right? He does turn into this, this bad guy. He does turn into the villain. So that we do have that moment where we feel slightly less bad that he gets both shot and hit in the head and killed. Um,
He was also rounding Jews up and shoving them on trains. Like, he's
oh yeah, with the whip, right? Yeah. So I mean, not a great guy. A Nazi is a Nazi, even if he's
yeah,
cute like
yeah,
Alex
yeah.
Skarsgård, and misses his wife in Germany. Um,
I cast Jason Segel. Um,
Explain Jason Segel. That's not a bad choice, but it seems random, and I want to know why you picked that.
he's I think he's someone who's very big. Like he's a big guy just in general.
Hmm.
I think he plays kindness very well. Like
Yeah.
I think he does a good job playing like a thoughtful, intelligent person. And rather than just him not trying to cast aspersions on Jason Segel's appearance, but rather than just casting a hot guy, which seems to be what I don't know what like the point of the attraction is in the book. Um, but I thought it would be more interesting if like this sort of big guy who you would be scared of building in your house, like I think he would do well with like that physical frame and then the capacity to be thoughtful and kind on top of it would explain a possible attraction more so in a way that like was in a way that supported Vianne a little bit more than just like I don't know, her husband's been gone 15 minutes and she's lusting after a Nazi. I thought that would give a little bit more depth to the fact that like she finds herself attracted to this person. Like
Okay.
Jason
Yeah,
Segel's like
I'm with that because I
like
mean Jason Segel's not. I mean he is a decent looking guy, but his looks are not what hit you over the head initially, right? Like that's
no, but he's a good looking guy. Like he's just a regularly good looking guy. But if you he's big and just I could see him
he could
playing
be intimidating because of his size if he was like a Nazi belaying in your house that you didn't know.
and then being nice. And I think you would believe him when he was just sort of like missing his children because I think he can
Yeah.
play sweet very well at the same time. And I just think it lends a little bit more credence to why Vianne would even entertain this to make it Jason Segel. And I think it cheapens V. And I'm already annoyed that the book cheapened her with the stupid romance to begin with. But I think if I just cast like some hot dude, I think it cheapens Vianne's character even more. That it's just like a
Yeah.
physical thing versus someone like Siegel. Um, for Von Richter, though, I did Jonah Hill, who I think could really play both a petty and annoying tyrant. Like
Yeah.
Jonah Hill can play like a horrid person very well. I'm sure he's also a nice guy. Much like Otessa Moshfegh, Jonah Hill's never talked to me. I don't know anything. I don't know him. You might be surprised to
Not
know.
friends with him.
Nope, not talked to me one time. But I think he can play like a Weasley. I also think Von Richter is better if it's someone who is like Jonah Hill could be ripped at this point for all I know, but someone who's not like a physically imposing person, someone who is like it's the power and the situation is all that they have to like put them in this position over another person, and I think he plays venal very well, like a sort of venal power.
Yeah. Okay. I'll buy that. I'll buy that. I'll cast Jonah Hill.
Yeah. All right. You know who you remind me of? What books did you have that were similar to this?
So there's another book that came out around this same period called Lilac Girls. Um, that is like what that is a World War II historical fiction novel that is also very like female character driven, and again just kind of like good story, very plot driven, very story driven, and again just very heavy on like female characters, their contributions, and just more of this like female story of war versus a lot of times our stories of war focus more on males. So that's who you remind me of. And then there's a nonfiction book called A Woman of No Importance, that is about a woman who was a very important spy during World War II. And it like I said, it is a nonfiction story. It is not so it's nonfiction. It is not plot driven. It is just this woman's life and her contributions. And so it is a very interesting story. So if you want to read it without the like machinations of sacrifice and relationships between sisters and some love stories thrown in for entertainment value, and you want a little bit more of this kind of like straightforward real world story, A Woman of No Importance. And I think something like that gets a little less billing over something like Lilac Girls or The Nightingale. So if you're looking for something in this vein and slightly different, A Woman of No Importance is worth checking out.
That is interesting that you bring that one up because it's a book about a real person. And the Isabel character in this book is based on a real person. It's based on André de Jong, um, a woman who in real life, I think, did actually lead airmen over the Pyrenees to safety so that they could keep flying missions and fighting with the Allies to defeat Germany and get them out of the theaters of war that they were in. She isn't French, though. She was Belgian. Um, it is a little funny that you say that because the book takes pains to like sort of these stories should be told, right? Not chastise us, but it does harangue us a little bit that like people don't know these stories and they don't get told and they don't get passed down and they're not a part of history. And then this book specifically does not tell one.
Yeah, that's interesting because again, it has to filter in some of these
Yeah.
entertainment value things because A Woman of No Importance, I don't feel like her story is going to get made into a movie because it was a real story and doesn't have these like other entertainment things sprinkled into it. And it sounds like Kristen Hanna read about this Belgian woman
Yeah.
and felt the same way and was like, yeah, you know what people like more? The French. You know what people find romantic? France. Let's set the story in France. Let's throw some romance in. Let's put in a relationship between sisters. Let's put in some daddy issues. Bam. We got a bestseller. Someone will make it into a movie.
And she's like, and I'll kind of make up for not telling her story by like putting in the book that people should be telling the real versions of
Yeah,
these stories. I'm not going to do it, but someone
but
should. It definitely
somebody should be
should be
doing it.
happening. Yeah. Um, Mine was Winter of the World, which is a Ken Follett book. It's out of his Century trilogy. I do not read a lot of historical fiction in general, but I read the Century trilogy, and the middle one, Winter of the World, is about World War One and Two. And that's kind of it's a sort of lame thing that it reminded me of. But I will say, if you like Kristen Hanna and historical fiction, I think Ken Follett is sort of the male version of her. Like, I don't think his books are not particularly male the way this kind of makes it a point to center female voices and stories. But um, he is writing like large scale historical fiction about eras, if you're into that. And the Century trilogy was an entertainment, parts one, two, and three. Follows the family from the first one. The descendants move through the other books. If you like that sort of thing, definitely worth it. At least on Audible, if nothing else. Did you have any quotes? I only have two. Not a
I
super quotable
do.
book.
This is not a super quotable book. I do have a couple. I think I have two. Um, One is sort of along the lines of we were talking about this like very American idea of like France and the French.
Yeah.
I have a quote that supports that. Isabel looked up, expecting to see more German soldiers, but it was a nuke. She was dressed, as usual, more for her temperament than the season, in all black. A fitted V-neck black sweater and straight skirt with a black beret and gloves. A Gaulois cigarette hung from her bright red lips, unlit. And that to me is just like very like what a French spy this woman is, right? Like
Yeah,
what would a
yeah.
French spy wear? She would wear all black. She would have a beret. It's the 40s, so obviously she's got gloves plus a cigarette, red lipstick. Like I've never read something more French in my entire
No,
life.
it is the most American idea of the French. It
A
is
hundred
the
percent.
like it's all the stereotypes of kind of how we view them. Like the way they're constantly complaining about like the Germans' pronunciation of French, that the Germans don't speak French
That the
very
Germans
well.
don't yeah.
They don't pronounce things correctly and like yo, that's how people who speak a second language pronounce things. They don't pronounce it like a native. That's just how language works. Like um
If a French person comes over here and speaks English to me, I can tell that they're French.
yeah, that's sort of how it goes. Like but no, it's I found it interesting that a French like Melanie Laurent had agreed was like going to direct it because in the back of my mind, sort of wondered if French readers reading this were sort of like, Sacre Bleu, what? It's it's 2024. This can't possibly be the best Americans can do when they like want to portray us in our country, but it 100% is. A lot of pain chocolat mentioned throughout the book, croissants and baguettes.
Baguettes.
My first quote is just, I thought it was just a good line. It's early on when Vianne is describing her childhood at Le Jardin when she meets her best friend Rachel. And she says, Rachel, as tall as the boys with eyebrows that grew faster than a lie. It's a funny, funny part of the body to like use as a description. First of all, eyebrows, but
Yeah.
um, but that's just a good turn of phrase. Eyebrows that grew faster than a lie.
Yeah, I
That's
like that.
that's nicely done. My second one is also, or my second quote is a little bit funny. It's not a particularly funny book, but this I thought was funny. It's when Captain Beck is like kind of freaking out because he's in charge of finding the downed American airman who's landed in Le Jardin and he can't find him. And Vianne's asking him what's wrong. And he says, an airplane went down near here last night, he said, facing her at last. An American aeroplane, the one they call a Mustang. And Vianne replies, I thought you wanted their aeroplanes to go down. Isn't that why you shoot at them? I got a chuckle out of me
And
when
that
I
is a
read it.
moment of like, and that is again where we see that like inconsistency in Vianne because like
Yeah,
that's kind of a clap. Like that's
yeah,
she's kind of
no,
clapping back at him, right?
yeah,
And it's like that's what
co-
like that feels
coming
I
with a
don't know,
little
man. He
sass.
yeah, like he's hiding in your barn. This doesn't feel like the time to be sassy. Even though
But I
she's
also
not
like
wrong.
like she's just calling him out. Like, so what's the problem then? A plane went down. Isn't that what you're up to? Isn't that the whole point? Isn't that what this is?
Isn't that
Around
what all
us, the
this is? Don't you want them to
fucking
go down?
yeah, the guns and the occupation and the whole thing. Those are my only two.
I have one more, and it's a quote about like the American airmen. Um, They were so dot 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 larger than life, these Yanks, with their ready smiles and booming voices, and their gratitude. Not at all like the Brits, who thanked her with clipped words and cool voices and firm handshakes. She'd lost track of the times an American had hugged her so tightly she'd come off her feet. And I just thought it was like an interesting portrayal of America, like because it is very American, I think, to be smiley and loud,
No,
basically.
World War II's golden retrievers.
Yeah, but then also to be, to be like nice and grateful for like, oh, okay, I see that you're risking your life for us. That's very nice of you, and I appreciate that. So yeah, I just kind of thought that was like I just thought that was an interesting sort of American observation.
Taking a dig at the British.
That's and
So
well, and again, as an American author,
would you recommend this?
absolutely. I think if you were somebody who enjoys, I think if you were somebody who enjoys World War II historical fiction at all, this is a very good story. I think it's worth the read. I think if you were somebody who considers yourself to be, if you were somebody who enjoys more literary work, then like you should know this is going to be a bit of genre fiction, and there's a couple things that could lift out of the story, but it's a good, easy, fast read that's an enjoyable story.
I can't imagine me actually telling someone to go out and read this in real life, but I do want to reiterate, like, I did enjoy, like, it was fine. I enjoyed reading it. I didn't dread it or anything like that. I think if someone, I think if I knew someone's reading taste and I learned a little bit about it and it was something that fell along these lines, I would be like, oh, I read The Nightingale. You should maybe try that one if you enjoyed. I see your shelf is full of Nicholas Sparks novels. You should try The Nightingale.
Yeah, if you like Nicholas Sparks, you will
Yeah.
absolutely love Kristen Hanna.
Yes, I see you have several Ken Follett novels here on your shelf. Have you heard of Kristen Hanna? The Nightingale was good. That's where I can see myself. Like, um, all right, what are we doing next?
So our next book is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens.
Another very popular. That's a book that people came up to me while I was reading it and talked at me about how much they liked it.
Yes, again, another book that people really, I think, kind of went wild for. It will be a second read for both of us, I think.
Yeah, it's
And
a second read for me.
I'm looking forward to getting into it and talking about some of what makes it so popular. I do think it's a unique story, so I'm excited to discuss it a little more.
I have that one we'll talk about when we get to it. I have read it before. It'll be a second read. That one and Salvage the Bones are books that like people approached me when I was reading it in public to like get in my ear about like their takes on it and how much they love those books. And they're very, very different novels.
They're incredibly different novels.
Yeah. All right. So that is it for the Reading Pop Classics episode on the Nightingale. Um, Once again, you can write to us at readingpopclassics.com. Tell us if we missed anything, if you have any thoughts about the Nightingale, if there's anything you think we should have talked about that we didn't, or if you've got recommendations for books you'd like to hear us cover on this podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram and Lit Salon. And that wraps it up for this episode.
And thanks for listening.